Sabona Mohle.
Sawubona CJ. Hey,
Njani?
ngithukile kodwa ngizozama ukwehlisa umoya.
Hayi ngizokusiza kancane.
Please ngiyacela ukuthi ungisize.
When did you join Nadel?
When did I join Nodel?
Yes.
When it was first formed in 1986.
Why?
Because we were involved, I was at that time working for Priscilla Jana, and she was doing about 70%, I would say, of the political trials in South Africa.
Let me step back. I actually wanted to ask you, of all the law firms, why did you pick on Priscilla Jana?
Because I wanted to make a difference.
And was it comfortable? Weren't you ostracized for associating with the likes of her, being a white woman?
I was ostracized by my community. I was ostracized by my family. But I was embraced by the black community for whom I acted for, and who saw me as being on their side, so to speak.
What gave you strength against the rejection by your own community, by your own family? What is it that helped you or saw you through that difficult period of being rejected by those who ought to give you support?
It was the right thing to do. It was the only thing to do in light of the injustices that were occurring around me.
Yes. And Saola, did you join Saola when it was formed?
I can't remember. Saola wasn't very active. for
2000, I was about to ask you, is it still alive? I was told by someone that it's still alive.
I'm told that it has resuscitated, but it wasn't very active. I think I was on the Gauteng executive for a short time, but it seemed to do, at that stage, do very little.
Yes.
In fact, most of my efforts were concentrated with Nodel.
And the South African chapter of the International Women Judges Association, are you still a member or have you dropped out like some?
No, I am a member. I was involved in their various mentoring programs over the last few years, and yes, I'm presently a member.
You are a disciplined cadre of that association.
Don't know how disciplined, but yes, I'm a cadre of the organization.
And when did you become a High Court judge?
I became a High Court judge in 2009 after undergoing what was a course by at that time introduced by the late Chief Justice Langer, and I understand Bridget Mabandla, Minister Mabandla.
Yes.
And it changed my life because I would never, ever have considered becoming a judge.
It was actually introduced by Minister Mabandla.
Yes.
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 And how did you find judgeship ever since you joined the High Court? Is it a pleasant experience? Is it a very difficult experience, particularly for a woman? Tell us about it.
I've loved the High Court. I've had the privilege of working under the most supportive and democratic DJP, Judge Mojapelo, who has really, I think, assisted in my growth. Johannesburg High Court is a very particular animal. It's fast-paced, you're at the coalface, it's very gritty, it can destroy you or you can love it. I've loved it.
I've picked up a few things about you, and one of the things that I was told that you're too humble to want to be elevated. It's a struggle to get you to act in a higher court. And I know it was a struggle to get you to act in the Constitutional Court. Why is that? Why are you reluctant to move on, move up higher?
I suppose as a woman, I never feel that I'm quite good enough, and I always think that there are people very much better than me. I think that's That's the only thing I can think of.
Is that what you believe, or is that what you've allowed society to make you believe?
I'm sure that's what I've allowed society to make me believe.
Yes. And humble as you are said to be, and as I believe you are, just boast a bit. Tell us why you should be among the 5 judges to be recommended for appointment to the Supreme Court of Appeal.
That's a difficult thing to ask me to do, but I do think I have a contribution. I think the Supreme Court of Appeal is a difficult environment. I think it's had an unfortunate history. And I think I can make a difference to collegiality. I think my judgments seem to have been acceptable. Very few, if any, have been successfully appealed. So I think I can make a difference.
Well, tell us, why do you say it's difficult, and what is it about collegiality that you think requires help or a contribution from the likes of you?
Well, let me start. When I first went to the SCA, I did a 6-month stint, and after that I thought, never again.
Why?
Basically, you were made to feel like an outsider by certain people. You were made to feel unwanted, incompetent, and incapable. When I went back, President Mandisa asked me to go back, and I found that things had changed dramatically. Part of it was my own attitude. I decided that they're not going to destroy me like this. And the other part of it is I think that the president had made, she was then permanently appointed, and she had made changes which I thought were good. Things were more open, there was more transparency, there was more discussion. Instead of gossiping in the corridors, things were, I remember there was a meeting where everyone was told to air their grievances, and I was very appreciative of that, and I thought it could really make a difference.
Are you aware that there are still colleagues at the SCA, whether junior colleagues or acting colleagues, who are still complaining about the treatment you've alluded to from some senior colleagues?
I'm quite sure they are, but those senior colleagues will at some point retire. And I think there are 5 appointments in this round. 5 appointments in a small court like the SCA can make quite a dramatic difference to the overall atmosphere of collegiality.
I obviously don't want you to name anybody, but how do these unacceptable mannerisms find expression? How do they manifest? What is it that is being done to make colleagues feel unwanted, unappreciated, incompetent, and whatever other negative thing they are made to feel or is being done to them?
Well, first of all, you know that there are discussions about judgments that you're involved in. You're not party to those discussions, but suddenly they're presented to you. The other thing that I found is that you make a comment, it's completely ignored. I don't want to go into racial groups, but another male makes a comment, the exact same comment, and it's lauded as a wonderful insight. And so that colleague is affirmed, and you are undermined. And there's just, what can I say? There's a constant undercurrent that really you don't deserve to be here. We will tolerate you, but you really don't deserve to be here.
More or less, how many are they?
Can I hide behind the fact that I haven't been there for very long? But
if you're not comfortable to answer, you don't have to.
I think some of them are retired.
Say more or less. Are you
Well-
able to
well,
say
we-
more or less 2, 3, 5, 7?
Well, there was used to be a reference to the top six. I don't know if that's a reference to the ANC or a reference to the SCA.
Okay, so it's the top 6. Does the top 6 include the president or exclude her in that context?
Oh, in that context, it certainly excludes the president. I think the president has done all she can to try and break that culture.
Do you have any views as to what could be done apart from patiently waiting for retirements that might not come soon? What is it that could be done to address this situation?
Well, I think the president has already started by tackling it head on, by saying, let's hear it. I mean, there are also things like diversity training workshops. I've just been on one for 2 days at the High Court. And I went to one a few years ago, and I went to it rather reluctantly, thinking, oh, what's anyone going to teach me about diversity? And it was the most wonderful experience. And I think that the SCA could benefit, not just an hour or two, an actual quite lengthy session of diversity. Because living in South Africa, we all have our prejudices, and we cannot deny it.
I want to ask you a difficult question. Difficult because I don't know how to ask it, but also difficult because I don't know whether I'm likely to be misunderstood by asking it. But I'll ask it anyway because I know my intentions are good. For how long have you been married to your husband, Advocate Malindi?
Well, our oldest daughter is 30 years old. We didn't marry then. We married when she was 2 years old.
Was it here? Did you break the law or was it outside the country?
No, we broke the law.
How did you escape imprisonment?
You know, at that stage, things were not so. They had more important things to worry about. The fact that Mandela was going to be coming out soon. The fact that the country was ungovernable to all intents and purposes.
So you took advantage of ungovernability.
Exactly.
President Meyer?
Thank you, Chief Justice. Good morning, Judge Nicholls.
Good morning, President Meyer.
I was just touched by something you raised with the CJ about your modesty and why you don't think you should be elevated to higher office, this modesty. And I just want to point out that it's an affliction most women, unfortunately, suffer from, and our society has not helped at all to help us to get us out of that situation. But you are good enough.
Thank you.
I also want to say that it's been quite a pleasure to have you at the SCA and grapple, with you over difficult legal questions. And I mention this because a judgment that gave us many, many sleepless nights, judgment in a matter that gives us sleepless nights will be delivered tomorrow. So happy resolution. I'm sure you'll be relieved to hear that. Now, I wanted to ask you about the crisis the court currently faces in terms of gender diversity. Today, there are only 6 women judges in the court out of a complement of 25. And one of those 6 will interview for the Constitutional Court vacancies tomorrow, and who knows, we may lose her. And she's one of the only 3 senior women judges in the court who were presiding, and we've just lost Justice Lewis. So I'm the only presiding woman in the court now. What can we do to get more women in the court? This is an exercise that daily gives me, headaches. Just what do we do?
cannot recommend highly enough the course that was introduced by Minister Mbandla and CJ Langer. You know, it gave women confidence. I, for example, would never ever have dreamed of even applying to the bench had I not gone on that course. And it was not a short course, it was a long course. We did 6 months where judgments were, where we were taught, so to speak, and our judgments were marked on a weekly basis. Then if we passed that session, we then went on to be mentored for 2 terms. I had 2 mentors, Judge Baruchovis and Judge Tsoka, who were invaluable to me. And only then could we act for 2 terms, and only thereafter could we, were we possibly appointed as judges. And for women with their natural reticence, I think, well, for me personally, I would never have done it. I would never have applied for the bench if I hadn't gone through that process. I would have thought, I'm not capable, I don't know enough. But it was a very supportive process. I had the 2 mentors who at any point said, if you have a difficulty, adjourn your court, come to me. And I did exactly that. And my confidence grew incrementally. When I look at some of the judgments I wrote for Judge Schwartzman, I hang my head in shame. With women particularly, I think, it's a matter of growing your confidence, affirming you slowly. I think it's very difficult to be thrown into the deep end and told to sink or swim. So if I had to recommend something, that is what I would recommend. I mean, there are, of course, there's a societal problem. Every judge needs a good wife, and women generally don't have good wives.
You have alluded to the challenges relating to collegiality in the court. What advice can you give me in this regard? What should I do to make the court not a warm environment, but in a collegial environment where everyone, can make their contribution without feeling stifled or unappreciated or lesser than?
President Meyer, I think you're getting there very slowly, but it's going to be a slow process. You can't have 30 years or more of that toxic masculinity mixed with racism and expect it to change overnight. A culture of a place changes slowly, and leadership comes from the top. And I think that you are going to have to accept that it's a slow process, but I'm quite sure that you will accomplish it eventually.
Thank you, Chief Justice.
Thank you. Wasn't there a woman involved in this whole unacceptable conduct? Just a yes or a no at the SCA. Was there a woman judge involved or not?
I suspect
in that particular top 6?
yes, but
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Commissioner Msomi?
Thanks, Chief Justice. This is a follow-up, Judge, to the question that President Meyer has just raised now. And that is, the Chief Justice earlier referred one candidate to Article 11 about the fact that, I'm paraphrasing him, but there's an article which is very specific about collegiality. Has the time not come to leave aside the niceties and enforce the code? In other words, people must be taken to task if they breach the code. Is that not the solution? Thank you.
it may well be the solution in a place like the SCA. Where I've been, both as an acting judge and a permanent judge for the last 10 years, is the Johannesburg High Court. And that is known for being the most collegial court in the whole of South Africa. Partly it's a function of we've got so much work that you don't really have time for pettiness. But on the other hand, our DJP did actively, if he saw people in specific groups, he would call them in and say, no, this is not acceptable. We're a collegial court here. So it was a bit of carrot and stick, as far as I understand from him.
And just as the last question, I was looking at your review by the GCB. They make reference in paragraph 8.3, and I heard you earlier greeting us in isiZulu. And they go on to say you are known to have basically to use isiZulu during the court proceedings to communicate with both unrepresented isiZulu speaking litigants and to follow evidence in the vernacular. Is it your contention now that perhaps the time has come where in a situation where you have a presiding officer who is Zulu speaking like you, the witnesses who are Zulu speaking, the prosecutor who is Zulu speaking, a defense attorney who is Zulu speaking, for the proceedings in our courts to be conducted in the vernacular languages?
There's merit in that. However, I do think there would be a problem with appeals, because you would then be restricting the appeal process to only Zulu speakers. So I would suggest that English be the language of the court, but I think every white South African should learn to speak a vernacular language.
Well, I can't resist this, by the way, comment. Is it correct that one day an African-speaking counsel appeared before you, was not understood by the other side and was insisting on speaking Afrikaans, and then you are reported to have said something like,
No, he was insisting on speaking Afrikaans. His clients were mostly black. He was insisting on speaking Afrikaans, and he said that it was his right. So I just said, so then he said, I think I'll change to English.
Commissioner Mpofu.
Thank you, CJ. Good morning, Justice.
Good morning, Commissioner Mpofu.
Thank you. Well, I have to make so many declarations. I'll only make a few of them. Yeah. That only, otherwise we'll be here all day. Not only are you a family friend, but a fellow founder of NADEL, but more importantly, the declaration, CJ, is that when I was a young student in 1985, I had to go to the COSATU launch in Durban, and I got a lift from none other than Justice Nicholls. So I must declare, because I probably owe her petrol money. But also, I also think that in the 80s, you and I broke the same law, yeah? But not together. Yeah.
We won't go there.
Yes, in separate places. Yeah. And I'm also a member of the top 6 of another a different structure, yes. But, and the CJ has always said we must not make declarations of saying you've got my vote and all that, correctly so. But I'm going to break that law and say I cannot think of anybody better suited for this position than you. But I wanted to also ask you a more personal question, because as you know, you and I were involved in the Delmas trial. You were an attorney, I was just a bag carrier. And you ended up marrying one of the accused in the Delmas trial, who is now Advocate Malindi SC. what challenges has that brought to you as a South African, and what experiences has it taught you about some of the ingrained prejudices in this country in relation to you personally, your husband, your children, the looks that you got when you took them to even a shopping spree, and how has that enriched your judicial experience, basically, and a sense of awareness of some of the prejudices, not just of gender, but more particularly around the racial issues, and how will that enhance the SCA if someone like you is appointed?
I think some of the prejudices, and if I remember correctly, Commissioner Mpofu, it was with your child too, because I would often take your child with my children, and I would always be told, it's so wonderful that you've adopted all these black children. I think I've had a very different experience from most white South Africans. I think I've been exposed to, fortunately through my circumstances, to very many different cultures. The Mgidi for your son when he came from the mountains. So I think I've been very fortunate in experiencing South Africa and all its diversity, and I think that's got to impact on. That's got to impact in my interaction with people, and it's got to impact on how I will interact with people in the SCA. I'm not sure if that's a very good answer, but I think all South Africans who have an experience of diversity contribute something invaluable to our judiciary.
Yes, no, if I may just follow up, yes. No, it is a proper answer, because, well, in my experience, even as a young article clerk attorney, just the question of language alone makes a huge difference.
Yes.
I can remember maybe 9 out of 10 cases, or criminal cases, where you'd either correct a bad interpretation, and that might save somebody
Yes.
from going to jail. So having a judicial officer who's aware of that is important. But my question was more around this question of diversity and the problems in the SCA, and whether you would be willing to assist the president with all your experience, your personal experiences in spearheading such a diversity campaign, even if some of the so-called top 6 would still be there. Yeah.
Of course, I certainly will be. I don't know if this is my humility, but I'm not sure that I'm senior enough to spearhead such a campaign, but
In
certainly.
life experience, you are more senior than all of them. Yeah.
But certainly, if I were asked to, I'd be most honoured and privileged to do that.
Thank you, Commissioner Mpofu. Commissioner Fourie?
Thank you, Chief Justice. Good afternoon, Judge Nicholls.
Good afternoon, Commissioner Fourie.
As is customary here, I also need to declare that we know each other well, and I place that on record. Judge Nicholls, in our interview for the position of the Deputy President of the SCA, some of the commissioners touched on the place and position of the Constitutional Court and the Supreme Court of Appeal. By way of background, there is some criticism, or perhaps a lot of criticism, that litigants have to go through too many layers before a matter is eventually disposed of. Litigants that are unsuccessful at the Supreme Court of Appeal level, as a matter of course, considers going to the Constitutional Court, whether they are successful there or not. It is still that process that that unfolds in order to get finality in a matter. That involves time, and it also involves a lot of costs. Now, with the Constitutional Court as the apex court, as opposed to the situation some years earlier, where the buck, so to speak, stopped at the SCA, but that not being the case anymore, although there are jurisdictional constraints as far as the Constitutional Court is concerned. Would you share with me your views on that, and if so, and indicate to me if you agree with what I've raised, what would you regard as a possible solution thereto? I will pose a follow-up question to you depending on what you're saying, and I don't want to necessarily at this stage suggest some solutions to you, but I would first like to hear your general views on it.
I think the concerns that you've raised are very valid. I'm probably one of the few judges whom in the last year have been at the High Court, at the SCA, and at the Constitutional Court. And it is quite remarkable to me the way that it's just another, every case that some that I sat on, some that I heard of in the SCA, automatically have come to the Con Court. It's just another layer of appeal, which with costs for litigants. So notionally, I would have no difficulty with your proposal that if I understand it correctly, is that the SCA and the Constitutional Court become one apex court?
No, I haven't got there yet.
Oh.
I first want your views.
So yes, I do think it's an unnecessary expense, and it's an unnecessary layer of unnecessary layer of appeal often, because it just seems the trajectory is always High Court, SCA, Con Court, irrespective of the issue.
And what would you see as the solution, seeing that you agree with the problem?
You know, I haven't given it any thought. I mean, I'd obviously like the SCA to move from Bloemfontein. I think Bloemfontein is a very difficult place to live in. I think that adds to the sense of alienation that people feel, because, you know, most people go home to their families in Bloemfontein. You
should tread carefully now.
All right.
I originate from the Free State.
All right, I'm sorry. My apologies, Commissioner Fourie, but I haven't thought of the logistics, but it seems to make a certain amount of sense to me. It would cut down costs for litigants. It makes sense to me, but to be honest, the logistics of it, I really don't know. I mean, they've been trying to move Parliament to one city, and how long has that taken? I mean, they've been talking about it for 30 years. So, oh no, sorry, not quite as long.
Sorry, finally, the sense that you're saying that it makes to you, do I understand you correctly to say a possible way of dealing with it is to make it one court?
Yes, with the proviso that I haven't given it very clear thought, but it does seem to me to be a very attractive solution.
I agree with you. Thank you, Chief Justice.
Thank you, Commissioner Fourie. In any event, the Constitutional Court judges and SCA judges earn the same salary, so it would be very easy to merge the two courts, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would, and I would imagine that both courts would value from the input of the other.
Could have 2 or 3 deputy chief justices and sit in panels, grand chamber as and when it becomes necessary, and save the public a lot of money.
It's the first time I've given it, it's been suggested to me, and I've given it any thought, but to me it seems like an excellent idea.
I must confess, I'm thinking aloud. I was provoked by the thoughts previously expressed by Justice Petze in my preparation, and that's when it dawned on me. Anyway, Commissioner Nyambi.
Thank you, CJ. Morning, Judge.
Morning, Commissioner Nyambi.
Afternoon. It's afternoon.
Oh, good afternoon, I'm sorry.
I will ask just one question. Well, I must indicate that I was happy how you were able to assist us to have a better sense of understanding of the challenges of SCA. Others are just speaking in general terms, and now we understand that there's just that top 6. So my only question is in relation to the transformation of the judiciary in South Africa.
Yes.
If you can share with us your understanding of the level of the transformation of the judiciary in our country.
Well, as I understand it, there have been great strides in terms of black judges being elevated to the bench. I think that there is more of a difficulty regarding female judges, particularly black female judges. So I think that the judiciary has made enormous strides over the last 20 years, but there's still a terrible dearth of women judges, particularly black women judges.
Thank you, Judge. Thank you, CJ.
Thank you, Commissioner Nyambi. I get the sense that when people express concern about not bringing in as many women as we should into the judiciary, very little attention is given to the preparatory stage for qualifying to become a High Court judge.
Yes.
The kind of work that you receive as an attorney, as an advocate, very few people, if any, talk about that. It's like people are ready and they are automatically ready. Nothing needs to be done. It's just that they are being ignored. What would you suggest should actually happen at that critical stage of sharpening one's forensic skills?
At the risk of repetition,
Apart from the Minister Mabandla program.
well, some training must take place. Some training, whatever it is, some training must take place. And as far as I'm concerned, the longer and the more thorough, the better. There was a criticism of that program, for example, that why did women have to do it and not men? And my view was, for once, we've been treated better than you men, because anyone who doesn't come from the ranks of silks, is male or female, is in exactly the same position as we were.
I'm aware that some women judges were criticizing the program. They said they were being belittled.
Exactly.
Why are they being treated differently from men, and why are they being given special attention?
And I strongly disagree with that view, and I've voiced my strong disagreement with certain women judges who've expressed that view. And I don't think any of us who went through a training program felt anything but gratitude that we'd been on it and that it was an invaluable experience to us all.
At the level of attorneys and advocates, I've been reliably informed that the attrition rate is very high when it comes to women.
Yes.
They don't get work, so they don't stay in the organized profession. What can be done to help them stay there? What is it that we need to do differently? It's the issue that is not being addressed. When people have work, and sometimes even women, they give it to men. What can be done?
You know, I was on the gender committee of the Law Society. I was an I was on the council of the LSNP for very many years. And I was on the gender committee. And the thing that struck me is that for women particularly, it's a work-life balance. Women must be accommodated. Women have families, and they've got to be accommodated. that doesn't mean to say that they are any less capable or any less hardworking. In fact, in the bad old days, men were always accommodated, white men were always accommodated by having to go and do military training for 2 years. That never impacted on their career. But if a woman has a baby, whew, that's bad news.
When you were in the Minister Mabandla program, how much did they pay you as people in private practice?
They paid me, I remember very clearly, they paid me 11,000 Rand a month.
I thought they said 19.
No, it was 11. Well, maybe it was maybe after tax. It was 11,000 Rand a month. Or it could have been 13, but it was 11 or 13.
Otherwise, a practitioner wouldn't have survived had training been offered without some stipend, would they?
No, you've got to offer a stipend. I mean, in my situation, it was very fortunate. I'd had a very bad car accident. I was, I think, in a wheelchair when I started. And I only went on the program because I thought, oh, I better start getting my mind working a bit. Physically, I'm getting better, but I better get my mind. And that was really the only reason I went. And then I found, oh, I enjoy this.
And the money was made available by the Canadians.
I'm not sure, but by some
Yes.
foreign funding.
Yes,
Yes.
very well. No, thank you. You're excused, ma'am.
Thank you, CJ.
Thank you.